Hello and a warm welcome to the True Crime Cocktail Hour. My goodness, what a week it's been, huh? So I don't know about you, but I think we should sit down for a minute, relax, have a drink if you want, and since you're already here and interested in true crime, why don't I tell you about a mysterious true crime case? So like I said, we're going to Scotland for today's case, I think for the first time ever on this channel, and babe, today's story is juicy. Super hot. We're gonna be talking about love triangles. Triangles, plural, that is. Sex, nudism, orgies, the whole 9 yards. And all these things led up to a horrific murder. I think it's gonna be a great episode, so let's not lose any more time. Cheers, and let's deep dive into the murder of Maxwell Garvie. It's the year 1953 and we are in Scotland, as forementioned. More specifically, we are in Aberdeenshire. What's in Aberdeenshire? Well, Balmoral Castle is in Aberdeenshire, and that is the Scottish estate of the British royal family. And it is at that castle where we meet 18-year-old Sheila Watson. She works at this castle as a housemaid, as did her parents earlier in the days. Her parents actually met while working at this castle. Her father was a stonemason and her mother was a chambermaid. So Sheila's parents lived in the castle in the staff quarters, as did Sheila when she was born, and so Sheila actually grew up in a freaking castle, which I think is like every girl's dream. So Sheila is a housemaid, right? But Sheila always wanted a life that was more close to the life of a princess rather than a housemaid, you know? And so one day, at a party, she met 19-year-old Maxwell Garvie. Maxwell Garvie is the son of a very wealthy family. His family owns a very, very big farm. Maxwell Garvie is highly educated, very charming and very extroverted. And he worked in the family business ever since he was 16 years old. Now, Sheila and Maxwell are a match made in heaven, and they get married 2 years after meeting each other in 1955. This is also the time when Maxwell took over his father's business, and Sheila and him, they move into this beautiful, luxurious farmhouse. Sheila and Maxwell would go on to have 3 kids together, 2 daughters and 1 son, and they just live this luxurious, happy family life. Sheila and Maxwell Garvie are also a high-respected couple in the neighborhood and also in the town of Aberdeenshire. They show up at every single event together, and it really seems like a lot of people really envy them for their status, wealth, and power. But, my dear children, the prudish Scottish community of the 1950s has no idea what's actually going on behind closed bedroom doors. You know, a lot of couples in the 1950s actually just had sex for the purpose of procreation, but Sheila and Maxwell, they let it rip. Even though they have been together for years, they still have sex every single day, often several times a day, and I was like, who has the time? But apparently they do, so good for them. And let me just tell you, every time they do get in bed, it's not like the old same old thing all over again. It gets as experimentally as possible. I mean, toys and mind-expanding drugs are really just the tip of the iceberg. So I guess it's fair to say that Sheila Garvie over here is anything but prudish or boring or uncreative in the bedroom for a woman in the 1950s. But Sheila is a lamb against her husband Maxwell Garvie. Maxwell is way more extreme about certain things than Sheila. Maybe you know these kinds of people who are always looking for the next thrill, who need everything to be new and exciting, people who seem to be a little bit restless, like it seems that they are never truly satisfied. That's Maxwell Garvie. So Maxwell, never satisfied. Everything has to be exciting and new. Everything has to be bigger and better. So for example, he will go and he buys a different car, a new car, every single week because the car that he bought 7 days ago is already boring him to death. And when the cars weren't enough, Maxwell went and he got his pilot's license. He then bought 2 small propeller planes and he took them for a spin. That got boring as well at some point. So what does Maxwell do? He flies them drunk as a skunk. which is why eventually he was given the nickname Flying Farmer by the community. So Maxwell Garvie is an adrenaline junkie, a sensation seeker, as one would say today, and this is why he always comes along with even more crazy ideas. And at the end of the 1950s, Maxwell found a new hobby: nudism, a way of life in which one is convinced that nudity and nakedness will heal the body and the soul in a very natural way, and also strengthens the connection to your own inner self. However, nudism doesn't necessarily mean sex. I mean, yes, some people will go and combine these things, right? But actually, in the 1950s, that's rather the exception than the rule. But I mean, we're talking about Maxwell Garvie here, so what do you think he's gonna do? Exactly. Combine these two, and in dimensions you can't even imagine. So one day, Maxwell actually convinces Sheila to drive all the way up to Edinburgh to visit one of these private clubs where nudism and orgies are combined, including partner swapping. Now Sheila, she's very skeptical at first, but she's also interested. Above all, she wants to please her husband. And so the two of them, they drive up to Edinburgh, and Maxwell is in heaven. He gets so involved into this scene of nudism and orgies and partner swapping, oh my goodness, he cannot be stopped. From that point on forward, he spent every single weekend in Edinburgh at this private club. And our guy Maxwell here is particularly taken by the partner swapping. Maxwell is head over heels for this nudism and swinger and partner swapping lifestyle, right? He even does not shy away from aggressively asking couples they are friends with if they would like to join them. Maxwell can be very convincing as it is, but he goes one step further. So in order to convince these people to join them in the bedroom, he would go and show them naked pictures of his wife, Sheila. Can't be doing that. But what do you know? There were 1 or 2 or 3 couples who actually agreed. And they were like, hey, yeah, let's do it. We'll join you. And so partner swapping was a regular event from that point on forward at the Garvey's residence. But at some point, even this got boring to Maxwell. And as always, he needed something new. Something even more exciting, and he has a great idea. So what Maxwell does is he buys this run-down cottage 1 hour away from the farmhouse, and he wants to open his own private club. At first, just a small group of people knew about this new cottage where orgies and sex parties were a regular event, but through word of mouth, the word spread. And more people started to show up and join this club and participate in these orgies or whatever was going on there. And I mean, Maxwell Garvie and Sheila as the hosts are particularly interesting to the other couples. They're very popular. But as you can imagine, the word about the hustle and bustle soon spread in this old town. And so at some point, everyone knew what this cottage was actually about, which is why the people of Aberdeenshire soon gave it the name Kinky Cottage. Love that. So let's see. Sheila, married to a man who can never be satisfied, right? Sex every day, several times a day, plus driving over to Edinburgh to go to this private club, having their own little private club, orgies, sex parties, in and out and roundabout, and everything you can imagine. That's Sheila's life, okay? But you know, at some point, everything is a bit much for Sheila. You know, she just wanted to chill for a minute, man. I mean, she wanted to be a princess, and now she's gotta, you know, suck dick the entire time. Maxwell, on the other hand, is still not satisfied. He again needs something new. Even the Kinky Cottage became boring at some point. So guess what he does? Well, he goes into politics. And then one day, at an event organized by his party, he met a young man, 20-year-old barkeeper Brian Taverdale. Brian Taverdale is also very adventurous, almost rebellious. For example, he was thrown out of the army for trying to steal a car. and now he works as a barkeeper. So anyway, Maxwell and Brian really hit it off, you know? Two peas in a pod. Especially when Maxwell brought up his 2 airplanes and asked Brian if he would like to join him for a couple of flights. So Brian and Matthew, they become really good friends, right? And ever since, Brian is an often seen guest at the Garvey residence, right? If he's not flying with Matthew, he goes on weekend trips together with Maxwell and Sheila. They do everything together. Dinner, theater, parties, you name it. And then one day, Matthew invited Brian over to their farmhouse for a whiskey evening in the fire lounge, including a sleepover. So Brian, God bless his soul, he accepted the invitation and he went there, but he really thought that he was just hanging out with friends, you know? And so at some point he got up, he said goodnight to everybody, and he went up to his assigned room. Maxwell had different plans though. Maxwell's plan is to set Brian and Sheila up, not to his wife's pleasure. He's more thinking about himself. I know, shocker. Hear him out. This is his reasoning. So first of all, he's convinced that Sheila, once she started sleeping with this 20-year-old boy toy, would even become more open and adventurous than she already is. And then second of all, Matthew was hoping that Sheila would be distracted, so he would have the time to find a couple of fares of his own, you know, and trade his women like he does his cars. New one every week. So Maxwell told Sheila about his plan to set her up with Brian, and Sheila at first is super hesitant. I mean, yes, she had slept with plenty of men, but it was always like within an orgy or a party. Her husband was always present. It was never really that intimate, just she and another man, and now just sleeping with this one man while her husband wasn't present. It appeared to Sheila to be actual cheating. Oh no, don't worry about it. It will even turn me on. Have fun, treat yourself, you know? The next thing you know is Brian's door suddenly opens and Maxwell pushes the naked Sheila into the room before turning around and just leaving. And so this naked Sheila is standing in front of Brian, and Brian is super confused. Like, he's so overwhelmed with this situation, you know? He doesn't really know what to think of it, but I mean, she's a beautiful woman, she's naked, and she's there. And so at some point, man will be man. Brian at some point was like, what the hell? If you insist. And so Brian and Sheila have sex for the first time. But it should not be just this once, you know? Brian over here is a terrific lover. And what started out as a one-night stand turned into a real affair. So Brian now knows about everything that is going on behind closed bedroom doors and in the Garveys' marriage. He knows about the Kinky Cottage and the open marriage, the swinger parties, the nudism, just everything. And Brian really enjoys the affair with Sheila. However, he finds Maxwell's behavior a little bit creepy sometimes. You know, it's a bit much. Like, for example, Maxwell always wants to know every single detail about their sex life. And then also sometimes Maxwell wants to watch while the two of them are having sex. And then on other occasions, when Brian is at the farmhouse for a sleepover, Maxwell sometimes, as a little game, he wants to flip a coin to see who gets to spend the night with Sheila. But FYI, as open and sexually free and adventurous Maxwell Garvey's life and marriage is, he does have one rule, one iron rule that must not be broken under any circumstances. And that rule is no catching feelings. But then Brian, he makes a crucial mistake. He introduces Maxwell to his sister Trudy. Now Trudy, she is 20-something old, you know, and Trudy is young and she is uninhibited and therefore a perfect match for Maxwell. And Trudy becomes his lover. Yes, that's happening. And Maxwell, with her, can live out every single one of his fantasies. You know, for example, having sex in the airplane while it is up in the air. They do that as well. Maxwell would also go and tell everyone who did not ask about his great sex life with Trudy, you know? And it's very disrespectful towards Sheila, and Sheila is not amused. But let me just tell you, Sheila is the least of Maxwell's problems right now because his lover, Trudy, is not only young and uninhibited, but also married to a man called Alfred. Alfred is a police officer. So Alfred eventually found out about this affair, and when he did, he lost his shit. He freaked out completely. But what does Maxwell do? He would just go over to Alfred and invite him to the Kinky Cottage, you know? A few strange women for you, pal, just to make amends, so to speak. And man will be man. It worked. Trudy is just absolutely fine with that. She's actually sick of her husband, Alfred. She has completely fallen in love with Maxwell. Now, Maxwell is so preoccupied with having sex with Trudy, her husband, Alfred, the Kinky Cottage, and whatnot, he doesn't really notice that in the meantime, things had gotten a little bit more serious between Brian and Sheila. You know, after a year of sex and walks on the beach and sex on the beach, whatnot, the two of them had developed feelings for each other after all, and thereby had broken Maxwell's iron rule. So, Sheila is on cloud 9. Maxwell is already sick of Trudy. So Maxwell decides, for Sheila and him, that it's time to find somebody new. A new woman for him, a new man for Sheila. Maxwell breaks up with Trudy and now demands the same thing from his wife, Sheila. But Sheila refuses. She doesn't want a new man. She wants to keep Brian. And Maxwell is furious. He had an idea that Brian and Sheila had developed feelings for each other. He was outraged. He felt betrayed. And so he gave his wife an ultimatum. Him or me. Either your little meaningless affair or me, the house, and the kids. Sheila decides in favor of Maxwell. At least that's what she tells him. So bottom line, everybody is angry with everybody, okay? Maxwell is angry with Sheila and Brian. Sheila is angry with Maxwell and Trudy. Trudy is angry with Matthew. Alfred is angry with Maxwell and Trudy, as is Brian. Chaos. So then Maxwell goes and he calls in a meeting of all the people involved, and he all invites them over to the farmhouse to set the record straight once and for all. Trudy's out, Brian is out. Both are banned from the farmhouse and the Kinky Cottage for life. And when it comes to Brian, Maxwell got particularly clear. Stay away from my wife or you regret it. But Sheila and Brian don't really stick to this, and they continue on seeing each other. They even go on a little weekend getaway together. Maxwell obviously finds out about this, but he does not respond with violence. No. He responds with the church. Yeah, I don't know either. Bottom line, Maxwell, the owner of an establishment called Kinky Cottage, went up to the priest of the community and ordered him to drive up all the way to his runaway immoral wife and bring her back on the holy path of matrimony. Oh boy. So Sheila, she listens to the priest and she packs up all of her things and she drives back to the farmhouse where she is given another ultimatum by her husband, right? Dump Brian or get a bullet in your head. And Sheila knows very well to take this warning seriously because Maxwell Garvie has a very sizable gun collection. And as Sheila knows, and as we do know, Maxwell's words always translate into action. And Maxwell was not kidding, goddamn. When Brian left the hotel the next morning, he was suddenly attacked by two strange men, and they inflicted very deep cuts on his face and also sent their best wishes from a man called Maxwell Garvie. But Sheila and Brian still see each other. Brian is attacked once again and beaten up very severely. And still Sheila and Brian continue on seeing each other. And Maxwell finds out. And then a couple of days later, Maxwell Garvie suddenly showed up at a police station in Aberdeen and he reported his wife missing. No one can reach her, no one can get in contact with her. But it's so unlikely for her to leave her kids behind. You know, she wouldn't do something like that. And then 2 weeks after her disappearance, Maxwell's phone rings. It's Sheila on the other line, very much alive. And she tells Maxwell that she actually did get up and ran away with Brian to London to start a new life together. Trudy actually had helped them escape. But now she tells Maxwell that she made a huge mistake and that she misses her children, her kids, and that she wants to come home. And so Maxwell got up and he went all the way to London to pick her up from the central station. And for a couple of weeks, everything actually went back to normal. Well, normal for the Garvies. But Maxwell is still super angry with Brian, And just to make sure, he sent 2 more thugs over to the bar where Brian is working at, just to make sure. And Brian at some point is convinced that Maxwell is actually trying to kill him. But then everything turns out differently. And then in May 1968, Maxwell got home late from a meeting of his party, and Maxwell and Sheila, they just talk for a little bit. They have a few gin tonics, they have sex, they both take a sleeping pill. Maxwell calls them anti-sex pills because it's literally the only thing that will knock him out so much he can't be having sex. And the two of them go to sleep. And it is in that night that Maxwell Garvie disappeared. So when Sheila woke up the next morning and she realized that her husband was no longer there, she first called up his colleagues, his political colleagues, and asked them if they knew where her husband was at, what he was planning to do the next day. And so his political colleagues, they tell her that he wanted to fly one of his planes the next day. And indeed, his car is at the airport, but all of his planes are still on the ground. And Maxwell Garvie can also not be found at the Kinky Cottage. And so Sheila ends up reporting her husband missing on the 15th of May 1968. And since Maxwell Garvie is such a sought-after, well-known man in the community, the search efforts are correspondingly extensive, but unsuccessful. Days turn into weeks, turn into months, without a trace of Maxwell Garvie. The police are totally in the dark until they get a tip from someone in August of 1968. And this tip from this someone eventually led to the arrest of Sheila Garvie and Brian Teverdale. March of 1968. Sheila wants to leave her husband Maxwell Garvie. She wants to be with Brian Teverdale instead. And so she actually gets up and she runs off to London with her new partner to start a new life. But once in London, Sheila really started missing her children, and she also did not want to hide for the rest of her life. And so she tells Brian that she can never be happy again as long as Maxwell Garvie's alive. So Sheila eventually comes back to Maxwell but continues to see Brian, even at the farmhouse whenever Maxwell is in one of his anti-sex pills-induced comas. And then one late evening, Brian suddenly showed up at this farmhouse again. He even brought a friend, a man called Alan Peters. Alan Peters is there to help get rid of the body. So Maxwell returned home late that evening from a party meeting, right? Remember? So they have gin tonics, they have sex. Maxwell takes an anti-sex pill, aka sleeping pill, right? So Maxwell is dead ass asleep. Sheila had faked taking one of these sleeping pills. She is wide awake. So Sheila, Ellen, and Brian, they meet in the fire lounge and they have a couple of whiskeys to them. They want to build up the courage, right? And then Sheila hands Brian one of her husband's guns. And Brian, he walks straight into the bedroom, and with the gun, he hit him on the back of his head. Brian then grabbed a pillow to muffle the sound, and he pulled the trigger without thinking twice. In order to digest the shock of actually taking somebody's life, Brian went and emptied the entire whiskey bottle just to throw up a couple of minutes later. So Alan and Brian, they get into Maxwell's car and they leave it at the airport to make it look like he actually wanted to go for a flight. After getting rid of Maxwell's body in an underground tunnel system at Lauriston Castle, where it should be found in August of 1968. And let me just tell you, it was a super hot summer and the body had been in this underground tunnel system, and the smell was unbearable, as investigators would later say. Meanwhile, Sheila stayed behind at the farmhouse to wipe away the blood and clean up the crime scene. She was not alone, however. Guess who helped her? Trudy. Who else? Alfred. Yes, the police officer. I mean, he knows exactly what to do and how to clean up a crime scene, and he hated Maxwell, so... Oh my goodness. But you know what? Everyone seemed to be relieved that Maxwell Garvie was no longer alive. So Matthew Garvey is hidden in this underground tunnel system, right? No one can find him. No one should ever find him. Officially, Maxwell Garvie remains just missing, right? And at some point, Sheila's mother, she moved into the farmhouse to help with the household and the kids. And Sheila, for the first couple of weeks, really remained silent about the murder. She didn't say anything. But then one day she did blab to her mother. And also her mother would not say a word to anybody until Sheila told her that she was planning to take the kids and Brian and move away to London to start a new life. And Sheila's mother couldn't bear the thought of her grandkids being raised by the murder of their father. And so one day she went to the police station, and she is the one who gave the tip to police that Brian and Sheila were actually involved in the disappearance and murder of Maxwell Garvie. So Sheila and Brian, they remained silent after the arrest for a couple of days, but on day 3, Brian eventually cracked and he confessed, and he told police where they would find Maxwell Garvie's body in the underground tunnel system of Lauriston Castle. And let me tell you, one police officer would later say that only with Brian's help they were able to discover the body. If Brian hadn't said anything, Maxwell Garvie's body would have never been found. So the trial against Sheila Garvie, Brian Taverdale, and Alan Peters began in winter of 1968. 10 trial days were scheduled, with more witnesses coming forward and telling the court about the salacious, juicy sex life of the Garvies. This whole story was just exploited by the media. You know, everybody was fascinated by the Kinky Cottage. It seemed like everyone was more interested in the sex life of femme fatale Sheila Garvie than in the crime itself. In fact, the details about the murder, how everything went down and all, is unclear to this day. Sheila Garvie, Brian Taverdale, and Alan Peters all presented different versions of the events of that very evening, of the night of the murder, and the court eventually decided for Alan Peters' version, which is the version that I just told you about. Sheila told the court that she was absolutely not involved, that it was all Brian's idea. She actually threw him under the bus. Brian told the court that Sheila had killed her husband accidentally during a fight, and she called Brian to get rid of the body, and Brian just called Alan Peters to help. Alan Peters' version is the version that I just told you about, and this is the version that the court believed. And because they were convinced that Alan Peters was the one telling the truth, he was actually acquitted of all charges. Sheila and Brian were not as lucky, and both of them were sentenced to life in prison. And get this, 3 months after entering prison, Sheila actually broke up with Brian in a letter. And both of them, unbelievable, were released from prison only after serving 10 years due to good behavior. It's unbelievable, but Sheila and Brian never spoke a word with each other ever again. We just know that Brian opened up his own bar after his release. He died very early, I think at the age of 48 from a heart attack. And Sheila, she opened up a little bed and breakfast. She got married 2 more times. Her third and last husband, he died of natural causes. Sheila would spend the last couple of years of her life in a retirement home. She suffered from dementia, and she eventually died in 2014 at the age of 80. The Kinky Cottage does no longer exist. My dear children, that was the story of the Kinky Cottage and the murder of Maxwell Garvie. Oh my goodness. What do you think? I want to hear your thoughts down in the comment section down below. Also, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up so I know that you enjoy what I do. And I think it's so cool. It's really fun to see that. Other than that, I don't know where we're going next week yet. Maybe Africa. We'll see. Until then, what's left to say is I hope you have a lovely weekend ahead of you. Try to relax a little bit, will you? Yeah, thank you. And if you don't have any plans next Friday, why don't you meet me here for another cocktail and, of course, another mysterious true crime case. Thank you so much for your support. Mwah. Bye.